Welcome to Relish Books. Today I am talking a little bit about the great classic Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. This is a really special kind of classic on a number of levels, and it's so massive that it's really impossible to talk about all the facets of it. You could talk about so many different things about it, so I'm just going to give a few of my thoughts. Whether I think it's really as good as it has been held up to be through all the years since its publication, and whether it should be read in our modern world. It was published in 1936, and obviously it's set during the Civil War. Most people are pretty familiar with the setting and basic plotline of the story. It sold over 6 million copies over 1 million copies in the first 6 months that it was published, and that was especially remarkable because it was during the Great Depression. So it was an immediate success, and it has remained a classic ever since. It's still commonly known. Margaret Mitchell won the Pulitzer Prize, so it's this very, very popular classic. Some classics were not popular at the time of their release, and it was really kind of a time will tell kind of thing. But Gone with the Wind has always been popular and has stayed popular. And it can seem kind of funny when you read it. When I read it for the first time, and I still do, I have mixed feelings about it, but I understand why it has been so influential. It's a book that's really shaped part of our culture, part of our mindsets, and I think people should really still be reading it today because it offers such a different perspective on the Civil War. I think when you read it, at least for me, it was so shocking. I was shocked at the way that the people in the story think about things, the way that they view things, the mindset that they approach their way of life with, the way that slavery is talked about. The characters in this book are deeply Southern. Obviously, they hate the North with the war and everything, but their view towards slavery, a lot of the time when we look back, at least from my experience, when we look back, we see things as so stark. These people were wrong, and people who had slaves were just monsters. And I think we fail to remember that for them, it was the way of life that they had grown up with. And their thinking is all on a wrong foundation. Their approach to slavery and those issues of equality and race is not so much, they're these horrible monsters, but the foundation of their thinking is flawed. The way that they have lived their lives, the whole mindset that has grown up in them is fundamentally wrong. And so they're very, very wrong, but I think not in the way that we tend to look back at them and think of them as being wrong. Because yes, they grew up this way and it's very wrong, but a lot of the time, things that we grow up with and just the way that the world is to us, we don't think to question. I think something that's also really interesting about the book is that it offers this perspective of a few of the slaves. Now, I believe that the vast majority of slaves were for abolition, of course. That's like a common sense thing. But you get the perspective from some of these wealthy families where things fit into this long-standing code and pattern and the way that they worked within the family. You get this perspective of some of the slaves who were also against abolition, which is extra strange kind of perspective, and something that you really have to kind of struggle with. And I think it's so important to read books that shock us in these ways, that challenge our thinking, that make us just make us think and make us struggle with concepts, and they can help us better understand the past, which I think is really important. And again, this should never be like the only perspective that you get on the Civil War or on the South, but I think it is really good to read because, yeah, you would never want this to be your only perspective, but nowadays it's a very rare one. We always get some other perspective, and so I think that it's really great to read a book like this because it is such an unusual perspective, and to realize Margaret Mitchell very thoroughly did her research. She talked to people who lived through the Civil War. She grew up in the South. She read thousands of documents. Like, she deeply understood this subject, and this is an authentic way that some people really thought and felt. And I think it's important for us to realize this other side of things, and to think about it, and to think about how it's wrong, why it's wrong, and to work through that instead of just to struggle through it and see it from real people's perspectives, rather than just dismissing this as a uncomplicated, just cut and dried right and wrong issue. There were a lot of issues being dealt with in the Civil War, and the South, the people of the South, were not entirely completely wrong about everything, and they suffered a great deal as well. And so it's just good to read it from this perspective. The other really interesting thing about Gone with the Wind, of course, the biggest thing, like, you can say that Gone with the Wind is a great commentary on the Civil War, on the South, on perspectives of slavery, but really it's a commentary on the character of this extraordinary woman, Scarlett O'Hara. She's such an interesting heroine because she is not a good person. She's a bad person on pretty much every level. She's a terrible person, especially at the beginning of the book, and she doesn't really change that much. Her changes are subtle, and because she has, the whole thing about her is her strength of character, her stubbornness. She is kind of, her whole character is this unchangeable kind of person. She is a solid, unyielding being, and it's interesting because it makes her because she's selfish and spoiled, it makes her a really bad person in a lot of ways, but it also helps her to be what she needs to be in some very difficult situations. So she's a complex character, and I really like that. Normally, for my normal reading, I don't want to sit around reading books with heroines that are so bad. I'm hesitant to call her unlikable, because while I don't like her, the book really draws from you a certain level of respect and admiration for certain of her qualities. I love how it also demonstrates that one of the other main female characters, who's seen as this very soft, weak person, is actually much stronger in her morals. So we kind of see these different kinds of strengths being portrayed through these very different women, and we also see that with the men in the story. But yeah, I think that that's really the biggest thing that sets Gone with the Wind apart and makes it such a classic, is the fascinating kind of tangled up web of who Scarlett O'Hara really is. And then coupled with that is Margaret Mitchell's amazing writing. She's really, really good. I think it's so interesting that she wrote the last chapter first And then she went back and kind of just wrote all the chapters of the book at random, and she wrote the first chapter last. And I think that you can see that when you read it. You can see how it makes everything tie together so well. You can see how everything that's set up kind of comes around in the end. I love the writing. There's so many striking scenes in the book, you know. Even though it's been a while since I read it all the way through, I can remember so many vivid scenes of emotion and action. The scene where Rhett helps her to escape. The scene at the ball where she is in mourning. Something about these moments, obviously the opening at the barbecue where she has the fight with Ashley and Rhett overhears, all the way down. I mean, yeah, it's such a great book for so many moments, and yet in such a huge book, because you see so much time pass, so much development. It really feels like you're living through all these years with them. There's such a sense of a passage of time and passages of a way of life as well. You can really feel the whole country shifting and a whole way of life going away and new things coming, and the way that people have to adjust to that. So it's just a massive, massive piece of work and really incredible. I think some of the first and last passages illustrate so perfectly, set the stage for what the story is going to be. So I was just going to read the opening line. Scarlett O'Hara was not beautiful, but men seldom realized it when caught by her charm, as the Tarleton twins were. So she starts right out. She knows who her character is, and you pretty immediately know who the character is as well, and that's who she is through the remainder of the book. So it's this perfect setup. She gets straight to the point. She knows exactly where she's going. And in a book this long, I think that that's really important. And then something that I want to read this paragraph, and this could be kind of a spoiler if you're not familiar with the story. It doesn't give away anything specific, but I do think it kind of sums up the story. So if you're not familiar with kind of where the story ends, you might want to skip this part, but this isn't the final ending. I think the final line is brilliant too, and the final line is what really, really stuck with me after reading the book. I'm not going to share that one. You have to read it for yourself if you haven't. Final line is amazing and memorable, but I think that this paragraph near the end sums up the history of the book, because it's really, you know, it's the Civil War stuff, all of that. That's the setting for what's really happening inside of Scarlett in her emotional life. You know, she spends most of the book thinking that she's in love with one man. Anyway, I think that this paragraph just sums up the entire book and who she is so well. She had never understood either of the men she had loved, and so she had lost them both. Now she had a fumbling knowledge that, had she ever understood Ashley, she would never have loved him. Had she ever understood Rhett, she would never have lost him. She wondered forlornly if she had ever really understood anyone in the world. And I think that that so perfectly sums up the entire book. The all of who Scarlett is, who she has come to be, kind of this glimmer at the very end that there is hope for change. You know, I'd always heard that this was a sad story, and it is. It's incredibly tragic on so many levels. The ending, in a lot of ways, really breaks your heart, because through everything, even though you kind of hate her and you rooted against her for so long, you do want things to work out for Scarlett. You want her, what you really want, in wanting her good, you want her to change, and that's what she won't do, you know? And then at the very end, when she finally has this realization, you feel so bad for her. I feel worse for Rhett. I always have sympathy for Rhett. I like him better than Scarlett, even though he certainly has a lot of the same flaws as her. But I think, I don't know, I have more sympathy with him. But at the end of this, you could say, oh, she kind of gets what she deserves. And she does, but when you're left with that, that's not what you want. You want her to find happiness. You want her to find goodness. And so even though the story is tragic and it ends on kind of a sad note, there's this little bit of hopefulness. This little bit of like, she finally realizes something. She realizes a truth about herself, about other people. She realizes that she was wrong, and she kind of knows a little bit of how to go forward. Of course, in the very last line, you kind of get her old spirit coming back into play, kind of this sense of belief that she can accomplish anything if she just works hard enough, which is a good belief to have if it's applied properly. So there's this little bit of hope. It is a tragic book overall, but there's a little bit of hope at the ending for possibly a better future someday. And I love that. It is, it's not a pleasant book to read. A lot of really hard, difficult stuff, a lot of things that will shock you and make you struggle. And so, I do think it is a masterpiece of a book, and that everybody should read it, because even if you hate it, it makes you think, and in thinking about it over the years, I've come more and more to see its greatness. So, sorry if that's kind of rambling. I know that I probably didn't say anything really original about the book because it's been so discussed and so well known, but I just want to say that for my part, I don't enjoy it necessarily, but I admire it and appreciate it and think that it's very worthwhile to read. So those are my thoughts on Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.